All right, let's dive into something that could truly be a monumental shift in how the world does business. Just imagine this. It's January 27th, 2026. After almost 2 decades of on-again, off-again talks, India and the European Union have finally sealed a landmark agreement. Now, this isn't just about making things cheaper to buy and sell. Oh no, this is a deal that could completely reshape global trade and redraw the geopolitical map as we know it. So what's actually inside this potential game changer?
You really don't have to take my word for it. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, she put it pretty bluntly. She called it the mother of all deals. And believe me, that's not just some throwaway political line. It really gets at the massive scale and the sheer ambition of bringing these two economic giants together.
So what makes it so massive? Well, how about this number? $27 trillion. That's the combined economic size of this new India-EU trade zone. And that's not just a number on a screen. We're talking about a huge integrated market of nearly 2 billion people. That's a bloc with the power to influence everything from global supply chains to investment and technology. So here's what we're going to cover. We'll look at why this deal is being called so historic and why on earth it's happening now. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of the agreement, see what's in it for both sides, touch on the challenges, and then zoom out to see what it all means for the future of global trade. Okay, so let's start with the basics. This agreement, which, remember, we're saying was hypothetically finalized on January 27, 2026, is way more than just a simple free trade agreement, or FTA. You know, those deals that just reduce barriers to trade. No, this is a really comprehensive pact that's being seen as a major turning point for India's place in the world and a huge strategic play for the EU.
And this is where you can really see the power of this combination. You've got India, right? A rapidly growing economic powerhouse and a massive democracy. And you're linking it with the European Union, which is the planet's largest single market. Put them together and you've just created one of the biggest integrated trade zones in the world, one that's built on a foundation of shared democratic values.
Which, of course, brings up a really big question. If this deal is so great, why in the world did it take nearly 20 years to happen? Well, the answer is pretty fascinating. It's basically a perfect storm of geopolitical and economic shifts that finally gave both sides the push they needed to get to the finish line.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows what a long and winding road this has been. Talks first kicked off way back in 2007, but completely hit a wall in 2013 over some pretty big disagreements. And for almost a decade, radio silence. Then, boom, 2022 hits, everything has changed, and the talks are back on, but this time with a totally new sense of urgency. So what created that sudden urgency? Well, it was a bunch of things all happening at once. You've got this global push to diversify supply chains, so we're not so reliant on just China. At the same time, both India and the EU are trying to protect themselves against potential US protectionism and China's growing power. Then you throw in India's booming economy, the EU's search for stable partners, and the war in Ukraine. And suddenly, it's like all the planets aligned.
Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of the deal itself, because it goes way, way beyond just cutting taxes on goods.
For India, this is just a massive win. Over 99% of its exports, by value, are now going to get preferential treatment in the huge EU market. This is an absolute game changer for key Indian industries like textiles, pharmaceuticals, and gems, making them way more competitive overnight. And what about for the EU? Well, this deal cracks open India's traditionally pretty protected market. I mean, just look at these numbers. Tariffs on cars, which can be over 100%, they're going to be phased down. Duties on things like wine and spirits, currently at a sky-high 150%, they'll be cut too. This gives European companies brand new access to India's exploding consumer class.
But like I said, this is about so much more than just goods. It also includes an investment protection agreement to give businesses more certainty. It opens up India's services sector. It even sets up deep cooperation on tech through something called the Trade and Technology Council. And on top of all that, it's got parts covering sustainability and a mobility pact to make it easier for students and skilled workers to travel between the two. So here's the bottom line. Both India and the EU walked away feeling like they got major wins. This wasn't a case of one side getting the better of the other. It was really designed to be a win-win partnership. For India, the benefits are super clear. A massive boost in exports, a ticket to integrate into those high-value European supply chains, and the chance to really co-create new technology. And for the EU, it's all about getting access to one of the world's fastest-growing markets, moving away from its over-reliance on China, and locking in a reliable, democratic partner in a pretty turbulent part of the world.
And, they're not exactly starting from zero here. As you can see from this chart, in 2024 alone, total trade was already over 186 billion euros. The EU is already one of India's biggest trading partners. This agreement is really designed to just pour gasoline on that fire and unlock its full potential.
Okay, but let's be real. No deal of this size is ever without its challenges or its controversies. And you can bet its effects are going to be felt far beyond just New Delhi and Brussels.
So, one of the biggest sticking points is something from the EU called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. It's basically a tax on imports that have a big carbon footprint. India is worried this could just be a sneaky way to protect European industries. Also, to get the deal done, really sensitive areas like agriculture were mostly kept out of it to protect India's millions of small farmers. And there's still criticisms about labor standards, not to mention the massive hurdle of getting this deal approved by every single EU member state, which can be a very long and messy process.
So with all those challenges in mind, let's zoom out a bit. How does an agreement like this fundamentally change the global landscape?
Well, the biggest global impact is pretty clear. It creates a powerful new economic bloc. In a world that seems to be fracturing more and more, this democratic trade partnership acts as a major counterbalance to China's economic power, and it's a hedge against any uncertainty coming from U.S. trade policy. It's a really clear step toward a more multipolar world.
And that brings us to our final takeaway: how this agreement really signals a new map for global trade, one that's based as much on strategic goals as it is on economic benefits.
This deal is a textbook example of a concept you hear a lot these days: strategic autonomy. It's this idea that a country or a bloc like the EU wants to be able to make its own choices without being overly dependent on any other single superpower. For both the EU and India, this is all about building that kind of independence and resilience in a world that's changing fast.
And this quote again from Ursula von der Leyen just captures that bigger vision perfectly. The EU doesn't see a strong, successful India as a rival, but as a vital partner for a more stable and secure world. It frames this whole thing as a win for everybody.
So if you take just one thing away from all this, let it be this: the lower tariffs and market access, those are just the tools. The real story here is geopolitical realignment. It's about two of the world's great democratic powers tying their economies together to navigate a fractured global system. Together.
And that leaves us with one last big question. As the old rules of global trade start to fade and major powers scramble to build new economic alliances, is this India-EU agreement the blueprint for the future? It definitely suggests a world that's not defined by one single dominant power, but by many interconnected centers of influence, and that is something worth keeping a very close eye on.